Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we are going to be talking about the new Kineticist playtest. It's been out for a couple weeks now, and I've been keeping up with all of the forum talk on it, and I've finally gotten a chance to do a little bit of playtesting myself. And so we're going to go over the theoretical what is here in the playtest, and then some insight from my actual gameplay. Here we have Yoon, the iconic, which is, it's cool that they have all these iconic characters. Her hand right here looks really weird though, but otherwise that's really cool. So this is the meat of all this stuff. Key ability is Constitution. This is the first class to have Constitution as its primary stat, and that is a little problematic because you have no skills based on it. It just means you've got the most amount of health, but you're already 2 points behind a barbarian because you only have 8 per level. So that's a bit of a problem. If the class was 10 base per level, then you could be like, hey, I can rival a barbarian in just HP tankiness. But the class really doesn't pan out that way. For the most part. And your proficiencies, you're trained in perception. You have expert in fortitude and reflex, trained in will. I am not sure, but I think this is the first class we have that maxes out both physical stats and has low will save. Almost every other class in the game has either will if you're a caster, or will plus fortitude or reflex, depending upon if your character leans more strength or more agility. And this also gets up to legendary fortitude, which I am not sure any other class has a legendary save. I've only played 2 classes to max level, so I don't really recall off the top of my head if any other class gets that. If not, that's a very interesting space that they are by far and away the best fortitude save class in the game, because you can get a 7 in your constitution score and have legendary fortitude saves, and there's even things built into the class, abilities to buff your fortitude save beyond that. So that is quite impressive, but how often are fortitude saves going to be that nasty? They can be. Like, reflex is probably the best save to have low, because that just means you're taking more damage. And that just means you have to have healer in your party, which you can overcome that. But having bad fortitude means you're going to get diseases and stuns and like ghoul rot and all kinds of things that you just don't want, because they could really ruin your day. I mean, crit failing a reflex save could also ruin your day, but a healer could just drop a big heal on you and you'll be fine. Whereas trying to get rid of diseases and stuns and stuff can be a lot harder. So it'd be interesting to see how that sort of stuff pans out, especially in higher level play. Skills, you were trained in nature, which is weird. I mean, this is sort of like a primal-ish class, so I guess that makes sense, but there's no ties in with the class whatsoever to using the nature skill, which I think is kind of bad. If it automatically gives you that skill, then you should do something with it in class. Like, you look at fighter, it's going to give you athletics or acrobatics, and generally in combat you're probably going to find ways to use the skills associated, the abilities associated with that skill. Whereas the nature skill, I can't see anything that would really help you as a primalist. Because mostly what this class does is damage. That's basically what you are. You are a ranged damage class. Because your attacks, you get trained in simple and unarmed. That's it. That doesn't look very offensive, does it? Defenses, trained in light armor and unarmed defense. That really doesn't look like you're a damage-dealing martial class, does it? You've got no martial weapons, no advanced weapons. You've got don't even have medium armor. And these don't get better. That doesn't change. You are bad at, offense and defense in the traditional sense, which gets rough. First big thing to notice is your inner gate. That's what the class is all about, is you have a ability within you to tap into the primal planes of elemental ability, of the elements, and channel those through you to do elemental damage. That sounds all great, but then you look at the sorcerer and you immediately see why that's not very cool, because all of the elements in this game just do bludgeoning damage, which is a problem. Except fire. But then fire is cool at low levels, but then at higher levels, it is the most resisted and outright immune thing that monsters have. And there's 3 choices for how you manifest your inner gate. And these are first level choices that you cannot retrain or undo in any way. You either become a dedicated gate, meaning you only have one element, a dual gate, meaning you get 2 elements, or a universal gate, meaning you have all 4 of the base elements. They're adding 2 extra elements in the final version that are not in the playtest, and we as of yet do not know how you gain access to them, because the universal gate may or may not automatically include those. Because this says you can channel all 4 elements, but there's going to be 6. And then if Universal Gate just gets these 2 extra ones for free and the other gates don't get more bonuses, it might be a problem. The upside to limiting how many elements you have is you get bonus first level feats, which this class has tons of feats because every element has its own section dedicated to feats, abilities that you can pick up with it. So the extra feats are good. The problem is they're only first level. And all of the feats, the elemental feats in this class, behave similar to spells. And if you know how spells work, they get weaker as you upcast them, by design. Higher level spells are supposed to be stronger than upcasted lower level spells of the same level. And that's a little bit of a problem for this class, because most of their bread and butter abilities are first level or second level or fourth level. All of their stuff that you probably want to spam is low level, and that means at higher levels they're going to be weaker than spell casting, even if they scaled like spell casting, but they don't, and we'll get into that. Your primary thing you always need to do is gather your element. You need to basically, you put your element in your hand. You light fire in your hand, you draw water to your hand, you put your element in your hand. It requires a hand to use any of your elemental abilities, because this game as a whole, Pathfinder 2, is all about handedness. It's all about handies. And that sort of becomes a problem in a few different ways, but generally, thematically, it's fine. But because of the way handedness is such a big thing in Pathfinder, you have to think about it. It's something you need to keep in mind. And then you get impulses, which are basically the vast majority of your abilities are called impulses. And this is a problem because impulse is The primary magical actions kineticists use are called impulses. To use an impulse action, you must have an element gathered. So you first have to gather element before you can use any impulse. So that's good to keep in mind, because there's a few abilities that make you think, oh, this would be cool to do a thing, but no, you can't do that thing because it's an impulse. Which is basically down to the gather element kineticist action. The element must be appropriate to the elemental trait of the impulse you use. For example, you must use water gather to do a water trait. Which makes sense. You know, if you're going to be a water bender, then you need to bend water, all that kind of crap. Unless you're universal, then you can swap between them. But it's still something you have to keep in mind, that you have to swap, and that costs an action to swap. Because action economy for this class is a major, major issue. The impulse trait also means that the action has the concentrate and manipulate traits, unless another ability changes this. And so far, none of them do. So everything you do is considered casting a spell and provokes. Literally everything. You use any of your spell-like abilities, those are spells. You get attack of opportunity. You do a basic ranged strike with your element, well, that's an elemental blast and is an impulse. So ranged attacks provoke. You go up to an enemy and punch it in the face with your elementally charged fist, that's an impulse. That provokes attack of opportunity. There's also defensive options you can have in this, which we will go over later, which also provoke. Everything you do on this class provokes attack of opportunity. If you can consider the Magus is okay because they have other options they can do, or way to get, reach to do their spell strikes, or just with a ranged weapon, and that is fine, this is never fine. There is a way to simulate getting around this problem the exact same way that a Magus does, but it costs a feat. And that's a problem. Because that feat also changes your damage type, your damage die. This is super awesome. Brutal. A ranged attack with this trait uses its strength modifier instead of dexterity modifier on the attack roll. But strength for this class has a lot of problems. And then auras are pretty amazing. We'll get into those eventually. Your bread and butter right here. Elemental Blast. Impulse. So you basically just throw your element at an enemy. Or you walk up to them and punch them with it. Here's the chart for all the damage. So you got air is slashing, earth is bludgeoning, water is bludgeoning, and fire is fire damage. Which is a bit unfortunate. The melee attacks with these are the same damage as the ranged attacks. That's an issue. Like, adding your strength modifier is great, but they're also one-handed weapons. 1d4, 1d8, 1d6, 1d8. That's not fantastic numbers. And when you compile on top of that, this class has no damage mechanic. So those are the numbers you do. And there's no way to buff it up. That's a bit of an issue. The class as a whole is rather low on damage. But these traits are kind of good. Fire has agile, finesse. Earth has forceful. Water has sweep. Air has agile, finesse, reach. And versatile B, which is useless. Slashing, versatile B. Actually, no. The other way around. Piercing and slashing together are useless. So this is good, because there's almost no enemies in existence that have resistance to slashing and then bludgeoning as well, unless they just resist everything. So slashing versatile B is the best combo of 2 physical damage types you can do. And the melee also has reach, so that's really cool. That immediately gets around the problem that you're going to provoke. But is it worth giving up all damage? Like, this is whip territory. That's bad. It's really, really bad damage. The ranged is agile, which for a ranged attack, that's pretty ridiculous. And 120 feet. Versatile B, that's pretty great. Except for, that damage is really bad. Earth is propulsive and tiny, tiny range. So with Earth, you can make it brutal so that you're using your strength both to hit at ranged and damage. But propulsive kind of sucks because it's half damage, which means it caps out at 3 when you're in your late teens, which is not fantastic. Fire is agile with range increment of 60. It's pretty decent. Agile on ranged attacks is almost unheard of. Like, throwing weapons have it, but the tried and true real damage dealers, bows and guns, don't really have agile. There's probably some 1d4 guns that do, but a 1d6 weapon with ranged weapon with agile, that's... I would probably say that that's worth it. If this clad had any damage boost. And then water pretty much has nothing going for it. 30 feet water. That's not good. It's literally shorter range than everything else, but it's got nice damage. And then adapt element. This is basically prestidigitation. It's a little bit better, it's a little bit more interesting, but it's 2 actions. You would never want to do this in combat because it doesn't really do much. It's literally just prestidigitation. Except for you can also do a little bit more. You can make it so that a creature that can't breathe whatever element you're in can breathe your element. So if you're water and you find a fish person drowning in the air because they're out of the water, you can let them breathe. Super thematic, virtually useless as an ability, especially for 2 actions. Like, out of combat, that's great. That's super cool, but as a combat ability, holy balls. 2 actions to do something like that, it's like, that's your turn, man. And looking ahead, this ability grows in power. It's the only ability we have that just grows in power through leveling the class. Presuming the multi-class for Kineticist just gives you everything the Kineticist has, like gives you Elemental Blast and gives you access to the feats, then this is the only adapt element, and it's the way it progresses is the only in-class thing that the Kineticist keeps to itself. Unless for some really terrible reason they make it so that Elemental Blasts in the multi-class are just hot garbage. But that would be really bad. So I really hope that they take another look at Adapt Element and really put some cool stuff in here, because the way that it grows in power with the class is actually pretty cool, but it could do so much more. Like, you could put damage bonuses into it, or just some sort of class mechanic to assist doing the class fantasy. Wrecking enemies. Then at level 3, you get Extract Element, which hopefully the final version of this will be a lot better, because it's kind of needed. You spend 1 action to gather element, but you don't do it from yourself. You gather it from an enemy, but that enemy has to have the trait of the element you are attempting to gather from them. It does minor damage, but there are so many enemies who can use elemental attacks or are like resistant to elements and stuff that don't have those traits. That is a problem. So hopefully that'll get fixed, that the creature either has the trait itself or any of the abilities it uses has the trait. Then when it uses those abilities, you should be able to draw element from its abilities it uses. So that the requirements for using extract element just need to be broadened. That's all. Because it makes it so that you ignore resistance to your element. Which is great for fire because, like we said, it's the most resisted and immune thing possible. And this also makes it so that you treat immunity as resistance equal to the enemy's level. So you can actually damage things that are immune to your element. That is bonkers. And if you look above this, we get elemental resistance. When you're connected to an elemental plane, you're protected from that element. When you have an element gathered, you gain resistance equal to your level. That's twice what pretty much any other option in the game gives you. And then this becomes immunity at higher levels. You can actually have immunity to elemental damage at higher levels, which is crazy awesome. All this regular stuff everyone gets. Criticals. This needs to get reworked. The critical for air is stray gales move the target 5 feet in a direction of your choice. Same thing as polearms. It's pretty terrible. It's not like absolutely useless, but it's pretty bad. Earth. The earth calls your target to it. If the target is on the ground, it's knocked prone. If it's not on the ground, it descends up to 20 feet. That is stupid good. Flails do this, and so do hammers, and that's basically the best critical specialization you can get. Knocking things prone on a crit is just dummy good. It's... You don't get attack of opportunity or anything, though, so you have less ways to capitalize on it than others, but it's still like the best thing you're gonna get. Flames, you do 1d6 persistent fire damage. It's decent. You gain an item bonus to this damage equal to the blast item bonus to attack rolls. That's hot garbage. So that means at level 20, your crit does 1d6 plus 4 damage. Actually, no, the item bonus would be just plus 3. So 1d6 plus 3 at level 20. You know how much percentage of a monster's health that is at level 20 compared to 1d6 at level 1? Like, this ability goes from being pretty damn powerful to completely fucking useless. And there's a lot of things in Pathfinder 2 that are like this, that they scale in such a terrible way that high-level play is actually hampered by this sort of thing because they did not put any thought into these. There's, like, the backstabber trait on weapons doesn't scale up at all. And it's just like, why is this here? This is cool at level 1. It's useful at level 5, and by level 10, it's just a drop in the ocean. It doesn't even matter anymore. Anyway, water. Water sprays violently, dealing splash damage equal to the number of weapon damage dice of the blast of the same type of damage. That's like, what? When you get a crit, you do splash damage, which you can assume to mean it hits everything around that's adjacent to the target you're hitting. And the damage is equal to the number of weapon damage dice. So 1 to 4. So the crit for this is you do 1 to 4 damage against everything surrounding the target. Meaning you could hit friendlies with it. Meaning you could hit nothing with it. Meaning you do no damage. 4 damage? 4 damage at level 16? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, it's just why. Like, I get that, you also have to take into account which of these elements is the strongest, because, let's face it, air is pretty garbage. 1d4 damage, it's pretty terrible. But then its crit is also bad. Earth does some of the best damage and also gets bonuses from strength. So it's the highest damage element, and then it knocks things prone. It's the best element to use. And the rest kind of do piddly shit. I don't think they're going to be able to fix this because so many things in the game are this way. They don't scale very well. Like, Earth is always going to be good. Knocking things prone, it's basically slowed 1, because there's almost no monsters that are written that have kip up. So it's always slowed. It always inflicts slowed 1, basically. That's always good, forever. Whereas most of these other things aren't. We'll see. I have no hope that this will get better. And this is the first, at level 7, you get the first bonus to the Adapt skill. Growing connection to inner gate lets you adapt an element with greater control and even greater element in limited quantities. You can use Adapt element on a portion of an element within 30 feet of you of light bulk or lower. Add the following options to your Adapt element action. You can cause the element to spread. If it's in an unoccupied square and it grows to fill that square, this might cause the square to become difficult terrain or hazardous terrain as determined by the GM. Making one square hazardous for 2 actions at level 7, pretty terrible. Pretty absolute garbage waste of your turn. But if it's already filling the square, you can make it be 2 squares, which is still not worth 2 actions in a combat. But after you proliferate an element, it reacts to the environment naturally. Water falls down if you put it in the air, or flows down a river if you're on an incline, whatever. But this basically means you can multiply by its original factor how much of an element is there. So if you have just a little bit of water, you eventually can make buckets and buckets and buckets of water. If you have a little bit of fire, you can eventually coax it up into a bonfire or a wildfire. If you have a little bit of stone, which that's pretty hard to not have in most places, you can just make more. You can just make more of an element. That is super cool and thematic, but as a 2-action in combat ability, it's useless. Absolutely useless. So they could add some really cool stuff to this level 7 ability and make it actually super cool. Because as an out-of-combat ability, this is excellent. It just needs some in-combat usability. Like, just adding extra damage if you have your element around you. Just something. Then Blast Expertise is a bit of a problem here because you don't get Expert in Unarmed until level 7. Everyone else gets it at 5. And I think they did this because all of your attacks are always going to be 1 point behind martials to start with, because you cannot max out strength or dexterity, your hit stats. So when everybody else bumps up, you also bump up. But instead of going up 3 points, you only go up 1 point. Everybody else goes up 2 points until level 7. Then you go up 2 more points, and then you're equal with everybody else. And then at level 10, you fall behind 1 point. So I think that's what they're going for, is like they didn't want you to get a +3 to hit at level 5. But just looking at it, it does feel weird, like a punishment of some sort. But I understand why they did this. Weapon specialization, martial extra damage, it's alright. Flexibility, you get the same ability as a fighter does. This is fucking awesome, because you have more feats than most other classes that you need to take for stuff. And the fact that you can just redo it every day is decent for a single gate, good for a dual gate, phenomenal for universal, because they start with the least amount of feats and they have access to the most amount of feats. So they love this. Then at level 11, we get another adaptation buff. You turn the element into the purest form of itself. For instance, you can remove pollutants from air or water or expel plants from soil. This can't change the grade of the material, alter the form of a manufactured object, or change the structural integrity of the element. So it's basically, you just get rid of poisons and all that stuff, which is cool that, you could just walk, if you have your air element, you can just walk into a cloud kill and just go like, oh, well, I'm just getting rid of this crap. That's great. But again, super cool theme. This sort of, like, you have to do a counteract to get rid of, higher level abilities and spells and all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty cool, and you actually has it in combat use. I would again like to see more put in here, more cool stuff, because adaptation is sort of like the kineticist friggin' class ability. It's the only thing that just improves as you level. Then at 15 you get improved flexibility, which is, awesome. 17, elemental immunity. You're immune to the damage of whatever element you have gathered. Now, that might sound like, you're permanently immune to this thing, but you're not. So keep that in mind. That's something we'll get to in just a little bit. Elemental mastery, your power gets better. You get master DC at 17th level. Now, this is an issue because you do not get legendary in your class DCs. All of your spell-like abilities scale off from your class DC. So you're always going to be 2 points behind in save compared to a caster. It's a big issue because not only are you going to be easier to resist on all your abilities, they also do significantly less damage than any caster abilities. Final gate, like, this breaks the class. Your inner gate reaches a perfect form, its power constantly fighting to be released. You're permanently quickened to use the action as gather an element. Like, that's the whole problem. One of the biggest problems of this class is action economy, and this sort of fixes it. But you don't get it until 19. So, class abilities, elemental familiar, this is stupid. Why would, it's thematic, and that's cool, but it's pretty useless for this class. You have no abilities that interact with this in any way, and it's just sort of like it's a ribbon sort of ability. You have a familiar, and that's cool, but not useful. Elemental weapon. This is what you have to take if you want to have a non-air reach weapon. But it turns your element into that kind of weapon, and it has to be one-handed. And it has to be the kind of weapon that you would normally be able to use, which means it needs to be a simple weapon because that's all you're trained in. And that just makes a lot of problems. Like, if you're air and you want more damage, then choose a D8 elemental weapon. But it has so many problems. Like, a feat just to fix the fact that you can't attack in melee without provoking. Like, that's rough. Flexible blasts. Whenever your physical prowess is, you can adapt your blast to suit it. You can give any melee elemental blast you make finesse, and any ranged attack brutal. So this is a feat that just makes it so you can use your primary stat, strength or dex, on all of your attacks. Which is sort of rough that it's basically a feat tax for a lot of different builds. Like, ideally, you want to go dex and just be a ranged damage dealer with this class because that's the safest, and this is a ranged blaster class. That's basically what it is. I made a strength character to see how bad it was, and you do more damage, and I could see it being worthwhile at higher levels, but having light armor and not pumping your dex really hurts at low levels. Kinetic Activation makes it so that all of your regular stuff just... Your element makes it so you can use scrolls of that element, which sounds cool, but like, how many spells have elemental descriptors? Because most of them, you're probably going to get an ability of that anyway. And it sort of just feels weird being a kineticist. I'm like, oh, I've got 500 scrolls of fireball because it's better than any of my actual abilities. Like, that just feels bad thematically. That just really feels bad. It's true. Fireball is better than any of the damage spells that the class gets, but it still feels bad. And, like, you're not going to afford a crap load of scrolls of a spell until your abilities are probably at least the strength of that spell anyway. It's not a good spot. Voice of Elements. You can talk to elementals. And so not command them, but diplomacy with them, which is kind of like, that's cool, but also useless most of the time. Like, that's a kind of cool thing where it's like, oh, hey, I know we're going to be running into an elemental today, so I'm going to use my flexible class ability to pick up Voice of Elements for today. Because you would never take that as a full-blown feat. It's just not good. Which is unfortunate. Because, like, all feats should have a general use thing, even if they are a niche sort of ability. Anyway, Blast Barrage. You fire 3 attacks at different targets for 2 actions. It's fake AoE damage, but your multiple attack penalty applies normally, so it's not good. Like, it's not abysmal or anything, but it's just not good. Like, for 2 actions, you should just be doing an overload ability. Unless you can't afford to for some reason. But then this comes off from this, but doesn't require it. Command Elemental. You can just gain control of an elemental. Which is cool, but again, how often are you going to need that? because it has to have the elemental trait as well as the trait matching your element. If there was maybe a higher version of this that allowed to control any creature that has your elemental trait, so like you could control a fire dragon for a little while, even if they got like an automatic level of success or something, so it was extremely difficult to do, that would be super cool ability. But we don't get those. Cycling Blast. Two elements dance in quick succession in either order. You can make an elemental blast and gather an element. You must gather a different element than the one you currently have. So you can either blast with your element and then pull your next one, because this is dual gate only, or pull your other element and shoot with it, which is super cool. But this is an impulse ability, which a lot of people miss. You have to have already gathered to be able to use this. So it's just a switching mechanic. And Cycling Blast basically replaces Gather Element for dual gate most of the time. Like, whenever you need to swap your element, you get a free attack. That's cool. That's just cool. And all three gates get a unique feat at level 6 that they can pick up. The dedicated gate is Stoke Element, which gives you bonus damage on your next attack. It's okay, but this should just be Gather Element plus, but it's Charge Element. And you can't use another impulse this turn. But the first time you use one on your next turn, it gets a damage bonus. Like, this could be so much better if it was just like the first impulse you use after gathering an element does this bonus damage, then that would just be a lot cooler. As is, this just adds to the problem of action economy that this class has. Because when you look at that damage bonus is semi-decent. Plus 10 for an overflow, that's alright. It's not great, it's equal to like Deadly Sorcery, but it's alright. Aura Shaping. This is almost a required feat because it's so freaking good. If you take any elemental aura, this makes it larger, scaling up to 30 feet emanation, and also makes it so that you can choose who gets affected by it, which is just bonkers. It's so good. 10th level Chain Blasts. It's attempting to be Chain Lightning, but worse. Because it's only doing your regular attack damage, and as soon as you miss, which since your accuracy is lower than Martial, is pretty likely. But every time you hit something, you can hit another enemy within 30 feet until you miss. It's a cool idea, but kind of weak. Because your accuracy is not up to par. Deconstruct Element. Dedicated only, which is kind of suck. Like, you can counteract something like this. This could be a lot better. Thematically, it's really cool, but it could just be better for the thing that it's trying to do. Fusion Blast for dual gate. This is basically power attack. You add the dice of damage from the element you are not currently using and add it in. So it basically just makes it 2-action power attack. Which is cool because it works a little bit better than power attack because you can get +4 extra dice instead of, I think power attack maxes out at 3. But just doing the math of this game, it is always better to strike twice, even with a -5 multiple attack penalty, than it is to power attack. It might not be so much with this class because it has so few damage bonuses, but yeah, that's the general math of the games. So this is not fantastic. It's cool, but it could be a little bit better. The universal one, however, is stupid awesome. Gather Amalgamation. You gather all 4 elements at once. But once you use any ability with them, it's gone. So when you think about this, that means you become immune. Once you get immunity, you become immune to all 4 elements when you amalgamation gather them. That is stupid awesome. And then you can use any elemental attack you want. So this gives you a lot of flexibility, like ridiculous flexibility. Rapid reattunement. You can just redo your flexibility feat for the day. Like, that's cool, but I'm not sure that's worth a 12th level feat. Being able to change one of your feats every 10 minutes is cool, but I don't know. It's kind of a big ask. Flowing kinetics. This just... when you use an impulse that has the air, fire, water trait, takes at least 2 actions, you can either step or stride up to half your speed. Like, that's so weak for 4th level. It's frustrating. But it's also kind of like action economy. You can move while you do a thing, which might actually be really needed because the class economy with this is rather bad. Steadfast Kineticist, ability to channel Earth. When you use an impulse that has the Earth trait and takes at least 2 action, you gain 1 status to AC and Fortitude saves until the next turn. Like, why is that just... It's an Earth thing in your general feats. It's really weird. But it's good. It's just kind of weird. Especially since I'm pretty sure you can get status bonuses from a lot of the Earth abilities themselves. But, oh well. Effortless. Allows you to sustain, which I think the... actually, no, there are a few abilities that you can sustain in this. Imperious Aura. You're going the Majesty Kinetic Aura marks you as a true child of the elements. Change your kinetic aura by using a different kinetic aura impulse. You can swap auras for free at the beginning of your turn. That's highly build specific, but cool. Because you can do it at the beginning of your turn. It's sort of like the stance feat that fighters and monks get. Except for you can do it at the beginning of every turn. Which is... it's just better than those other feats. So, if you can use this, it's awesome. Otherwise, it's useless. Maelstrom Blast. Make a melee elemental strike against each enemy in the blast. This is just Whirlwind. It's because you can't use 2-handers or anything, it's much weaker than Whirlwind, so... You can also make it a cone out to your range increments, so 120-foot cone with air. Like, maybe you'd be able to work some decentness into that, but who knows. Nourishing Gate, you can sustain yourself on a single drop of elemental. As an 18th level feat, this is pretty terrible. Like, you don't need to breathe, eat, or sleep. That's really cool, but literally, there's items, like level 6, level 8 items that allow you to do most of that stuff. So why waste a level 18 feat? Ugh, it's really bad. Unless you don't have access to any of those things, I guess. Flawless Element, you've perfected your control over one element. Choose an element. Any impulse that element you use normally take 3 actions, only 2. This is stupid good. And then, extra elemental flexibility. But Flawless Element just fixes the problem this class has with action economy, because then you get a free draw and all your actions cost 1 less. It's really good. Well, your 3 actions only take 2, so it might be build specific if you don't like any of the 3 actions at all, but otherwise it's pretty good. And I'll do another video diving into all of the elemental specific ones, but don't expect too much. So until the next time, be well.